His hands were shaking as he stood at the altar, not from nerves, from something he'd heard the night before. A conversation between the two people he trusted most in this world, whispering secrets in his father's study, secrets about him, about his family, about everything he thought was true. And in that moment, staring into his bride's eyes, he made a choice that would either destroy his family forever or finally set them free. Before we go deeper into what happened that night, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because what you're about to hear isn't just a story about a wedding gone wrong. It's a story about loyalty, betrayal, and the secrets families keep for generations. It's a story about a man who discovered that the people closest to him had been living a lie. And it's a story about what happens when the truth finally comes out, and you have to decide whether to protect the people you love or expose them to the world. His name was Michael Harrison. He was 32 years old, successful and respected. He owned his own consulting firm and lived in a penthouse overlooking the city. Everything about his life looked perfect from the outside. His father, Thomas Harrison, had built a real estate empire from nothing. Started as a contractor, became a developer, eventually controlled millions of dollars in properties across 3 states. Thomas had taught Michael that success meant control. Control over money, control over emotions, control over information. Never let people know too much about your business. Never show weakness. Never let family drama become public. Michael had internalized these lessons completely until he met Vivian. Vivian Matthews worked as an interior designer. She wasn't impressed by Michael's money because she had enough of her own. She was intelligent, independent, and refreshingly honest in a way that made Michael feel seen for the first time in his adult life. They met at a charity event 3 years ago. He was there because his father insisted he network with wealthy donors. Their eyes met across the ballroom, and something shifted for Michael. He felt like a person, not just a successful son of a powerful man. Their relationship developed slowly and genuinely. Michael introduced her to his parents after 8 months of dating. His mother, Catherine, loved her immediately. Catherine was a warm woman who had spent decades learning to navigate her husband's rigid personality. She saw in Vivian the same quiet strength that had helped her survive a marriage built on control and careful distance. But Thomas was different. He watched Vivian carefully at dinner, asked pointed questions about her family background, her education, her previous relationships. After that dinner, Thomas pulled Michael aside and said something that would echo in Michael's mind for years. He said, "She's not from our world." And Michael responded, "Then maybe it's time I built my own world." The engagement happened a year later. It was romantic and private, just the two of them on a beach at sunset. But as soon as Michael told his father about the engagement, things shifted. Thomas became oddly invested in the wedding details. He wanted to know about guest lists, about where the reception would be held. Catherine noticed the tension and asked Michael about it, but he brushed it off. Something about this engagement bothered his father in a way that went deeper than just wanting a nice wedding. And then Vivian started becoming distant. She was still loving, still affectionate, but there was something preoccupying her. She would check her phone obsessively. She started taking private calls outside, whispering just out of earshot. The night before the wedding, Michael couldn't sleep. Around midnight, he went downstairs to pour himself a drink. That's when he heard the voices coming from his father's study. One was his father's voice, deep and controlled. The other was Vivian's. Michael stood in the hallway, knowing he shouldn't listen but unable to stop himself. He heard Vivian say his father's name with something pleading in her tone. She said, "Richard, you promised me." Michael froze. His father's name was Thomas, not Richard, but his father had mentioned once that his own father had called him Richard as a middle name, Thomas Richard Harrison. His father had always gone by Thomas, Why would Vivian be calling him by his middle name? His father responded with frustration. He said, "I know what I promised, Vivian, but we're past the point of planning now. We're past the point of controlling the narrative." Vivian sounded like she was crying. She said, "Then give it to me. Give me what you promised and I'll sign the agreement. I'll marry him tomorrow. I'll do exactly what we arranged. But I need to know that this is actually going to happen. I need to know that after tomorrow, Michael will finally know the truth." Michael's heart began racing. His legs felt weak. He steadied himself against the wall. His father said something Michael couldn't quite hear, and then Vivian's voice came again, louder now. She said, "What happens when he finds out what his grandfather really did? What happens when Michael discovers that everything his family built was based on taking something that didn't belong to you?" Michael stepped closer to the door. He wanted to burst in, but he forced himself to stay silent and keep listening. His father said, "After the wedding, after he signs the documents transferring the property, you'll get exactly what was promised to you, but not before. If Michael finds out tonight, everything falls apart." Michael's mind was reeling. Sign the documents? Transfer property? What property? And more importantly, what did Vivian's agreement have to do with any of it? His father continued, "You came into his life because you wanted something from this family. That's the reality we both understand. But Michael doesn't need to know that right away. Let him marry you tomorrow. Let him believe he's marrying for love. Then, once the legal agreements are in place, you can tell him everything." Michael heard footsteps. Someone was walking toward the study door. He retreated quickly, back up the stairs. He sat on the edge of his bed in the darkness, trying to process what he'd heard. So Vivian had come into his life intentionally, so his father had been helping her. So there was some kind of agreement about property and documents. After leaving his father's study, Michael didn't confront anyone. Instead, he started investigating. He called his Uncle David, his father's younger brother who had distanced himself from the family business. Michael steered the conversation toward their grandfather. David got quiet on the phone. He said, "Why are you asking about this now?" Michael made up an excuse. David didn't believe him, but he told Michael something crucial. He said, "Look up the Matthews family in your grandfather's records. You'll find the answer there." That night, Michael went to his grandfather's storage unit. The unit was filled with boxes, filing cabinets, stacks of old ledgers. Michael started searching methodically. It took him hours, but eventually he found it. A file labeled Matthews Development Company. Inside were documents detailing a business partnership from 35 years ago. His grandfather had partnered with a man named Robert Matthews to develop a significant property. The documents showed that his grandfather and Robert had agreed to split ownership and profits equally, but somewhere along the way, his grandfather had forced Robert out of the deal. The documents became increasingly hostile. Letters from Robert's lawyer demanding restitution, offers of settlement that his grandfather refused. And then, 30 years ago, the letters stopped. Michael found his grandfather's personal journals in the storage unit. In them, his grandfather had written about Robert Matthews. He'd written that Robert had threatened to expose the partnership theft to authorities, but his grandfather had convinced him that going public would destroy both their families. His grandfather had suggested they come to a private agreement instead. Robert could take a lump sum payment, and the matter would be settled quietly. Robert had accepted. His grandfather had written that it was the best investment he'd ever made because it had bought his family's reputation and his family's future. Michael realized that Robert Matthews was Vivian's father. Michael spent the next several hours digging deeper. He found evidence that his father had been secretly transferring money to Robert Matthews over the years. Amounts that seemed random at first, but when Michael added them all up over 3 decades, they totaled close to the original value of the stolen property. His father hadn't just kept quiet about his own father's theft. He'd been actively trying to repay it without anyone knowing. Michael also discovered that Robert Matthews had passed away 5 years ago. That meant Vivian was now the legal heir to whatever the family owed her father. As Michael continued sorting through his grandfather's documents, he found something he hadn't expected: a sealed letter addressed to Michael specifically. On the front, in his grandfather's handwriting, it said, "To Michael, to be opened when he's old enough to understand the weight of choices." Michael carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, several pages long, written in his grandfather's handwriting. His grandfather wrote that he and Robert Matthews had been partners in every sense of the word. They'd built their first development project together, but success had changed his grandfather. He'd become obsessed with the idea of sole ownership, with proving that he could build an empire entirely by himself. His grandfather wrote that he'd made a choice to force Robert out of the partnership. He'd used his connections with lawyers and city officials to make Robert's position untenable. He'd filed lawsuits. He'd contested contracts. He'd made it so difficult for Robert that Robert had eventually agreed to sell his portion at a fraction of what it was worth. And then his grandfather had built the company into the powerhouse it became. But the letter wasn't a justification. It was a warning. His grandfather wrote that he'd spent the last years of his life understanding that power without integrity is hollow. The most important part came at the end. His grandfather wrote directly to Michael. He said, "By the time you read this, you may have discovered what I did to Robert Matthews. You may think this makes you ashamed of me, and you should be. But I'm writing to tell you something I learned at the end of my life. The mistakes we make don't have to define us. The choices we make after we realize those mistakes are what truly define us." Your father will probably try to protect this family's reputation by managing this situation carefully, quietly, making it go away. Don't let him. Sometimes the only way to truly heal is to tell the truth, even when it costs you something. Before we continue with what happened next, let us know in the comments. If you were Michael in this situation, what would you do? Would you confront your father immediately? Would you call off the wedding? Would you let Vivian explain herself? Comment below and let us know. Also, if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button now, because the next part of this story is where everything changes. Reading that letter changed everything for Michael. It made him understand his father in a new way. Thomas had been trying to quietly fix what his father had done. Thomas had been living with the knowledge of what his grandfather had done, trying to atone for it secretly. Thomas had been trying to be better than his grandfather in every way, but Thomas had still perpetuated the family's core value system. He still believed that family secrets should be kept secret. That information should be controlled, that the outside world shouldn't know about family problems. This had led Thomas to engineer Vivian's marriage to Michael as a way to resolve the debt, secretly, to make it look normal and unremarkable. Michael understood that his father wasn't a villain, but he also understood that his father's way of fixing things had created a new kind of dishonesty. Vivian had come into Michael's life as a pawn in a game between two families. Michael had been kept completely in the dark. Everyone involved had lied to him, either through commission or omission. Tomorrow, he was supposed to marry a woman he loved but couldn't trust. He was supposed to sign documents that would transfer family property without understanding why. Michael made his decision in that moment. He would marry Vivian, but he would do it knowing the truth. And he would do it with a plan of his own. He would let everyone believe they'd successfully executed their scheme. But during the wedding, Michael would change the rules. He would tell the truth, all of it, to everyone. The morning of the wedding arrived. Michael felt strangely calm. He'd showered and dressed in his custom-tailored tuxedo. This person was about to blow up his family's entire structure. This person was about to expose his father's crimes alongside his grandfather's crimes. But this person was also about to finally tell the truth. And Michael had decided that was worth whatever came next. The venue was beautiful. The ceremony was held in a historic church downtown. Michael arrived early. His father was already there, standing in the groom's room, adjusting his own tuxedo. Thomas looked nervous. Michael wondered if his father had guessed that Michael knew something. An hour before the ceremony, Michael received a text from Vivian. She wanted to meet him before they walked down the aisle. They met in a private hallway in the church. Vivian looked stunning in her white dress, her hair styled in elegant waves. When she saw Michael, her expression softened immediately. She reached for his hands. She said, "Hi." Michael realized something in that moment. He realized that even knowing everything he knew, even understanding that Vivian had deliberately entered his life under false pretenses, he still cared about her. He still wanted to make this work. Michael said, "Why did you really come into my life, Vivian?" She looked confused. Michael said, "I know about your family. I know about my grandfather and your father. I know about everything." Vivian's face went pale. She stepped back from him. She said, "Michael, I can explain. Your father was supposed to tell you. After the wedding, he was going to tell you everything." Michael said, "I do understand. I understand that my family wronged your family, and you were trying to fix that. But I need to know, right now, whether anything between us has been real." Vivian's eyes filled with tears. She said, "I came into your life for my family's sake. That's true. But Michael, you changed everything. Somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you. And that terrified me because it made everything complicated. I've wanted to tell you the truth for months." The ceremony began at 3 o'clock. The church was filled with 200 guests. Michael's mother was crying with joy. His father sat stiffly, his hands folded in his lap. An organist played Pachelbel's canon as Vivian walked down the aisle. Michael watched her, this woman he loved and didn't trust, this woman who'd lied to him but whose tears in the hallway had seemed genuine. The priest began the ceremony. Michael had written his own vows specifically for this moment. The priest asked Vivian to recite her vows first. She did, her voice steady despite her tears. She promised to love Michael faithfully, to support him through challenges, to build a life with him. Then it was Michael's turn. He said, "Vivian, I wrote these vows thinking I would recite them today and keep a secret until later. But I've realized that secrets are what got our families into this situation in the first place. So I'm going to tell you something in front of all these witnesses. I know why you came into my life. I know about your father. I know about what my grandfather did. I know about the agreement you made with my father. And I'm going to say this anyway. I choose you, not because I don't know the truth. I choose you because I know the truth, and I'm choosing to love you anyway." Vivian's face crumpled. Michael continued his vows, pledging to be honest with her, to never use secrets the way his family had, to build something different than what came before them. When he finished, the entire church was silent. Vivian could barely speak her response. She just nodded and said, "I choose you too, forever." The reception began 2 hours later. At 9 o'clock, Michael stood to make a toast. He clinked his glass, and the room gradually quieted. Michael began by saying, "I want to tell you all a story. 35 years ago, my grandfather partnered with Vivian's father to develop a major real estate project. They were supposed to be equal partners, but my grandfather wanted sole ownership. He forced Vivian's father out using every legal tool at his disposal, and then he built the company into the billion-dollar corporation it is today, alone." Michael paused and looked directly at his father. He said, "My father discovered this crime years ago, and instead of going public with it, instead of doing the right thing immediately, he decided to manage it quietly. He transferred money secretly to Robert Matthews, trying to repay the debt without anyone knowing what had happened. But there was a problem with that approach. The debt couldn't be truly repaid in secret. Real restitution would have meant acknowledgement. Real restitution would have meant my family admitting what we'd done." Michael continued, "When Vivian came into my life, I didn't know any of this. She knew. She knew that her father had never been truly compensated. So she made an agreement with my father. She would marry me. And in exchange, my father would finally, completely restore everything that had been taken from her family. I'm telling you this not to shame my father. My father has spent his entire life trying to be better than his own father. But secrets don't fix things. Secrets just pass the burden to the next generation. Michael turned to face Vivian directly. He said, "Vivian, I married you today because I know the truth, and I believe we can build something real anyway. Something honest, something not built on lies or secrets." He raised his glass. "So, I'm asking everyone in this room to witness this. My family is going to be making a public statement acknowledging the business practices of my grandfather, apologizing to the Matthews family, and transferring the disputed property. We're going to tell the truth about how our wealth was accumulated." 6 months after the wedding, the public announcement was finalized. Michael's family released a comprehensive statement detailing the business practices of Michael's grandfather, the theft from Robert Matthews, and the decision to provide full restitution. The statement included a formal apology, information about the property transfer and the financial settlement, and a commitment to institute new ethics practices. The response was mixed. Some people were sympathetic, others were suspicious. Still, others were angry. But something unexpected happened. The Harrisons became known not as a corrupt family trying to hide their crimes, but as a family willing to face accountability. Michael's father struggled at first with the public nature of the revelation, but gradually, Thomas seemed to find peace in the honesty. He told Michael that he felt lighter, like a weight he'd been carrying his entire life had finally been lifted. Michael's marriage to Vivian became a partnership in truth rather than a transactional arrangement. They worked together to establish a foundation dedicated to restoring wealth that had been stolen from minority business owners. They traveled together, investigating cases of historical business theft, helping descendants of business owners reclaim their rightful inheritance. The lie that had brought them together had transformed into a shared mission that actually meant something. Looking back on everything that happened, Michael understood something about his family, about himself, about what it means to live with integrity. Revenge wasn't about hurting the people who hurt you. His wedding wasn't a revenge story in that traditional sense. Instead, his wedding became the moment when his family finally stopped protecting the past and started building the future. The revenge was in the truth. The revenge was in refusing to continue the cycle. The revenge was in becoming someone different than what came before. Michael often thought about his grandfather's letter, about how his grandfather had tried to warn future generations about the dangers of unchecked ambition and hidden shame. Michael had listened to that warning in a way his father hadn't been able to. He'd taken the revelation and transformed it into something that actually helped people. Vivian's family got back what they'd lost. Other families got justice. The Harrison family got back its integrity. And Michael got to build a marriage with a woman he genuinely loved, based on truth rather than secrets. If you're watching this and you've ever wondered what you would do in Michael's position, what would you choose? Would you protect your family's secrets? Would you expose them for the sake of truth? Comment below and let me know. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me if you think Michael was right to make his family's secrets public. Tell me if you've ever had to choose between loyalty and truth. I read all the comments and I want to hear your thoughts. Because sometimes the hardest choice isn't between love and betrayal. It's between protecting people you love and helping them become better versions of themselves. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.